produce the same colors by applying a high potential in evacuated chamber. Okay, so by applying a high potential to an evacuated chamber, they were able to get the same lines. Now, this is what they called the hydrogen spectrum. That is how they know that in the sun there is lot of hydrogen and helium. Okay. Now, this hydrogen spectrum was found to consist of several groups of lines. So they called the Lyman series. These groups of lines were named after the inventor or discoverer of those lines. So you have the Lyman series, you have the Balmer series, you have the Paschen series, then you have the Brackett, and then you have the Pfund series. Okay, so you have the Lyman, Balmer, Paschen, Brackett, and Pfund. Now, how are these lines produced? These lines are produced whenever electrons from a higher level come to the respective levels. What are those respective levels? For the Lyman series, they can come from higher orbits to first level. For Balmer series, they'll come from higher orbits to the second shell. That is, this is the K shell, this is the L shell. Here they'll come to the third shell, that is KLM. Here they'll come to the fourth shell, that is N. Here they'll come to the fifth shell, that is O. Okay. Now, the energy of the K shell is 13.6 electron volt negative. The energy of the L shell is minus 3.4 electron volt. The energy of the M shell is minus 1.51 electron volt. N shell is 0.84 electron volt. Then this one is 0.51 electron volt. Okay. So the difference between these two, that is 10.2 electron volt, is the minimum energy of a line or of a spectral line in the Lyman series. Yeah, 10.2 electron volt is the minimum energy. Same way, the difference between these two is 1.9. So 1.9 electron volt is the minimum energy of the line in the Balmer series. Yeah. Similarly, you have between these two you have approximately 0.77 electron volts. So that is the not 0.77, 0.67 electron volts. So that is the minimum energy of a line in the Paschen series. Now between these two, it is approximately 0.34. The next one is 0.31, so it is 0.2. So this gives you the minimum energy of a line in the Pfund series or in each of these series. Very clearly you see that there is a reasonable difference in the energies. Because there is a reasonable difference in the energies, there will be a difference in their frequencies. Planck told us that the energy of any radiation is equal to h into frequency, f for frequency, which is also written as nu. Okay, nu for frequency, f for frequency. So this is the energy of any line in any of any spectral line is equal to h into frequency. That was a theory which was proposed by Max Planck, and accordingly we have h as a Planck's constant. The value of h is 6.63 into 10 power minus 34 seconds. So that frequency is number of waves per second. So pi per second, so it will become of course this is not just per second, it is joule per second, joule second. Joule second, so that frequency is per second gets cancelled and you get joule. Okay, so this is what is the hydrogen spectrum. Yeah. Now Bohr was able to explain the hydrogen spectrum to a very great extent. So that was one success that Bohr achieved. Yeah, despite the problems with his theory, that was one success that Bohr achieved. Bohr was able to clearly say that an electron has this radius. Radius is equal to 0.529 into n squared by z. Then Bohr was also able to say this is the energy. Energy is minus 13.6 into z squared by n squared. So much is the energy. So he was able to say the radius, he was able to say the energy, and he was able to explain the hydrogen spectrum. Okay, so this is the greatest success as far as Bohr's theory is concerned. Yeah, so if you can make some notes here, we will just move ahead. We will just move ahead. I am not going to answer questions like show me the first slide, show me the second slide, all those things. Yeah. So should we call those required energies as minimum energy? Yes, they are the minimum energies. I will increase the zoom. Yeah. Forget it. No, I'm not going to show any slide to anyone. Yeah, we're just going to work. Some are feeling that a lot of you all are coming late, even sitting at home, you all are coming late for class. So definitely I'm not going to allow. Okay, so here this is the minimum energy that we are talking of. Okay, so the minimum energy is the energy gap between two successive. So minimum energy, say for example, if you're talking about the Lyman series. So Lyman series, the minimum energy is when it comes from 2 to 1. Okay, when an electron jumps from 2 to 1, you have minimum energy for Lyman series. For Balmer series, when it comes from 3 to 2. Bastian series, when it comes from 4 to 3. Bracket series, when it comes from 5 to 4. Fund series, when it comes from 6 to 5. This is the minimum energy. So it is 13.6 into 1.6 into 10 power minus 19 into 1 by 1 squared minus 1 by 2 squared. Yeah, so this is equal to hc by lambda. So here it will become equal to 13.6 into 1.6 into 10 power minus 19 into 1 by 2 squared minus 1 by 3 squared. Okay, so the next one will become 1 by 3 squared minus 1 by 4 squared. So as you keep going down, you will see that the energy gap keeps reducing. The energy gap keeps reducing. Now this is the ultraviolet part of the spectrum. Ultraviolet part of the spectrum. These are all in the infrared part of the spectrum. Infrared part of the spectrum. The Balmer series is the visible spectrum. Balmer series is the visible spectrum. Okay, so these are certain things that we need to understand. Okay, so now if you understand this, then I think we are done with Bohr. So I would just like to recap the whole thing. So the first thing is postulates, Bohr's postulates. So Bohr's postulate, his first postulate is that the angular momentum of an electron in any orbit is quantized. So quantized means it can take some specific values. Okay, they are integral multiples of nh by 2 pi, where n is the orbit number. Okay, so kn is equal to 1 for the k shell, n is equal to 2 for the L shell, n is equal to 3 KL M shell. This n is also referred to as the principal quantum number. N is referred to as the principal quantum number, also called the shell number. Okay, so that is what is the first point. Yeah. Then the second point is, I've been telling the second point so many times, that an electron revolves around the nucleus. Okay, I said I'm going to, yeah, around the nucleus in fixed circular orbits. And I've been telling you that they are fixed in terms of radius and energy. So as long as an electron revolves in a particular orbit, it neither gains nor does it lose energy. So I have been telling this so many times, so by now it should have been in your memory. Okay, so an electron revolves around the nucleus in fixed circular orbits, fixed in terms of radius and energy. So long as the electron revolves in a particular orbit, it neither gains nor does it lose energy. And then he gave his atomic structure, which we have said, which we know already, we know, saying that he found out the radius, he found out the energy, and then he explained the hydrogen spectrum. So I hope you understand the meaning of spectrum. Spectrum basically constitutes, spectrum is the constituent of light emitted by a particular gas when it goes to its excited state. If you see your street lamps are all called halogen lamps. So they are called halogen lamps because inside it there is a halogen as a gas. Either it will be chlorine or bromine or iodine or something. There are halogen lamps. There are mercury lamps. So inside it you have mercury vapor as the gas which gets excited. You have sodium lamps. In that you excite the electrons in sodium and you get light from it. Okay, so the advantage of these lights is these are mostly monochromatic. Okay, these are mostly monochromatic, or they may have other radiations also, but there will be very clearly one radiation which will be predominant. Yeah, one radiation which will be predominant. Okay, so this is it. Now let's look at the deficiencies in or objections to Bohr's theory. Objections to Bohr's theory. Objections to Bohr's theory. So first objection to Bohr's theory is that Bohr's theory works for hydrogen and hydrogen-like species. So what do you mean by hydrogen-like species? Basically, it works for isoelectronic or monoelectronic species, that is single electron species it works for. That means it will work for hydrogen, it will work for helium plus. So in helium you take away one electron, it will work for helium plus. It will work for lithium 2 plus. From lithium there are totally 3 electrons, you take out 2 and you get lithium 2 plus. It will work for lithium 2 plus. It's like that. It works for hydrogen and hydrogen-like species. What do you mean by hydrogen-like species? Those species which have a single electron. So now this is an important question for you. They'll ask you, for which of the following will Bohr's atomic structure work? So Bohr's atomic structure will work for all those cases where all those single electron species. So if there is only one electron, Bohr's atomic structure works, and it works very well. Okay, so this is the first disadvantage. Now, why is it like this? It is like this because Bohr did not consider did not consider interaction between electrons. Okay, Bohr did not consider interaction between electrons. So in his theory, nucleus was interacting with the electron, but no two electrons were interacting with each other. Yeah, no two electrons were interacting with each other. So Bohr did not consider the interaction between electrons. Because of that, it works only for single electron species, and this was one of the negatives, because it works only for hydrogen. It doesn't work for any of the other elements. Yeah, it doesn't work for any of the other elements. It works only for hydrogen. Yes, so if you can make notes, I'll check if there are any questions. Monochromatic. I will show you the slides now, but I'm quite unhappy, you know, because when I start the class at 9:46, there are only 120 people. Now there are 195 people. That means 75 people are late to the class, which when they're sitting at home. So this shows very, very poor state of affairs. Today I am showing. Next class onwards, you guys see it in the recording. So that is probably the best place for you to see it. But I am not going to show the slides again. There's nothing in the first slide. There's nothing. I'm just saying that people were investigating light coming from the sun. People were applying high potentials to evacuated chamber containing hydrogen gas. And based on that gas, they saw that there is a similarity between the spectrum, hydrogen spectrum, and the light that we are getting from the sun. Okay, this is the second slide. This is the third slide. This is the fourth slide. This is the fifth one. This is the sixth one. And this is the last one. Okay, so this is the last one. Okay, so now monochromatic. Monochromatic means single frequency or single light. If you saw the Lyman series, in the Lyman series, we see that there are many lines in it. A line coming from 2 to 1 is one line of energy coming from, see, each light has a specific energy. So if there is only one energy, we will say it is monochromatic. Okay, now if something is coming from 2 to 1, it is 1, 3 to 1, it is 1, 4 to 1, it is 1. But if you look at the Lyman series, it can have all of these. If the Lyman series has all of these, then we are saying that Lyman series is not monochromatic. Unlike this, yes, unlike this, when you look at light coming from, let's say, a halogen lamp or a sodium lamp, you get only one predominant frequency. Okay, so that is what is the meaning of monochromatic. Anyway, so I was talking you about the negatives of the Bohr's theory. So his first negative is basically the fact that it works only for isoelectronic species, I mean single electron species. Single electron species like hydrogen, helium, lithium. It doesn't work for helium. It doesn't work for lithium because here there are more than one electrons. It doesn't work in all those cases where there are more than one electrons. It works only in those places where there are one electron. Okay, the reason why it doesn't work at other places is because Bohr did not consider interaction between electrons. He did not think what is going to happen when two electrons are interacting. He thought about electron versus nucleus interaction, but he did not look at the interaction between electrons. Electrons also interact with each other, so he did not consider that. So this was one problem with Bohr's theory. Okay, now the second problem with Bohr's theory is, yeah, people at this time knew about isotopes, they knew about isobars and all those things, but Bohr did not spend any time trying to explain the meaning of isotopes, and he did not explain what isotopes are, isobars are. He did not focus on the explanations for isotopes and isobars. Okay, so now hydrogen exists in three isotopes: hydrogen 1,1, hydrogen 1,2, hydrogen 1,3. Okay, this is protium, Protium. This is deuterium, Deuterium. This is tritium, Tritium. Okay, now Bohr did not focus on all this. He said, doesn't matter. He didn't focus on this. He was just bent on focus. He was focusing a lot on the spectrum, which he explained. He was focusing a lot on what is the radius, what is the energy, he explained. Other than that, there were many other questions which people were asking, which he was not able to explain. This is one of the other questions that he was not able to explain. Okay, so he was not able to explain the whole reason, concept behind isotopes. Isotopes are nucleus which have the same number of protons but different number of particles. That is, there is a difference in the number of particles, nucleons inside the nucleus. Isobars are species which have the same mass number, but they have different atomic number. That means the number of species inside the nucleus is the same, but they have different atomic number. So here the atomic number is the same, the mass number is different. Isobars are the exact reverse. The mass numbers will be the same, the atomic numbers will be different. Okay, so he was not able to explain this. Then there were few other points. He was not able to explain the Shark effect and the Zeeman's effect. Okay, now the question is, what are the Shark effect, what is the Shark effect, and what is the Zeeman's effect? Now the Shark effect is this, that if you take a gas here, if you take a gas and you apply a strong electric field, yeah, and then you perform your experiment and then you analyze the spectrum, each line was further divided into was further split into two very close lines. See, if you look at this, so this is shell 1, shell 2, shell 3, shell 4. An electron is coming from here to here, an electron is coming from here to here, an electron is coming from here to here. Okay, so now this is one spectral line, this is the second spectral line, this is the third spectral line. Now, when you apply a strong electric field, this one spectral line also was divided into two very fine lines. Okay, so this one line itself was divided into two very fine lines. Okay, so he was not able to explain this. Similarly, when you expose it to a magnetic field, that is Zeeman's effect. The same thing, when you expose it to a strong magnetic field, again you get two spectral lines. That is, each line is split into two lines, which he doesn't explain. Okay, basically what he's trying to say is that the electrons have behaved differently to an electric field. That means inside the atom there must be two different types of electrons. Similarly, because each of the spectral line was again split in the case of a magnetic field, he said again to a magnetic field electrons are behaving differently. If electrons were systematically moving around the nucleus in a circle, they won't be behaving differently to the magnetic field. So that was the big objection that was raised. Because he focused a lot on spectrum, this was considered to be a very big objection. Basically the Stark effect, not I wrote Shark, I think I'm sorry about it, I should be writing Stark. Stark, not ST. So the Stark effect and Zeeman's effect. Stark effects and Zeeman's effect refer to the splitting of spectral lines in the presence of strong magnetic and electric fields. Okay, the splitting of spectral lines, the splitting, SPLITTING, splitting of spectral lines in the presence of a strong electric and magnetic field was not explained. So Bohr was not able to explain the splitting of spectral lines in the presence of a strong electric and magnetic field. So that was considered to be a big weakness of his. Okay. Yeah. Shark effect is separate objection. They both are together. Yeah. Calcium and argon are isobars. I am saying that if you take a chamber, this chamber has hydrogen in it. Okay, you excite the hydrogen. When you excite the hydrogen, it starts emitting radiations. When it starts emitting radiations and when you observe them, you will see the Lyman series. You will see the Lyman series. Then you will see the Balmer series. Okay, so here you will see some lines. Here you will see some lines. Okay, now suppose you apply a strong electric field here. It is seen that each of these lines are basically not one line, but they are two lines, which Bohr has not been able to explain. The reason why they are two lines is this, that an electron is not just rotating, it is also spinning. An electron is not just rotating, it is also spinning. and depending upon its spin, it behaves differently to the electric and magnetic fields. So Bohr did not understand this whole concept of spinning of an electron. Yeah, so these were some of the objections which were raised to Bohr's model of an atom. Primary objection, that it worked well for monoelectronic species, that is for single electron species. It did not work well for more number of electrons. So his energy predictions didn't work whenever there were multiple electrons. The reason why it didn't work is obviously because he did not consider interaction between electrons. The second thing is he could not understand, or he did not focus on the concept of isotopes and isobars. So if you are giving the structure of an atom, you should be able to say what are these isotopes, what are these isobars. Yeah, so that is one more thing that he was not able to focus on, or he was not able to explain. The next thing that he was not able to explain is he was not able to explain the splitting of spectral lines. Splitting means each line that he told exists actually was not a single line, but were actually two lines very close to each other. Now those two lines which were very close to each other were getting separated only when you apply a strong electric and magnetic field. So Stark and Zeeman were able to show that. Now once Stark and Zeeman were able to show that, they asked Bohr that you know the structure of the atom, you have given the structure of the atom, can you explain this? And Bohr's model of an atom does not explain the reason for the splitting. The reason for the splitting is primarily the fact that one, electrons are spinning. Not only are the electrons spinning, but the electrons are also rotating around the nucleus, not in circular orbits, but in elliptical orbits. Yeah, so Bohr was not able to focus on that, and Bohr was not able to explain that. So those were the objections which were there to Bohr's model of an atom. Okay. After applying a strong electric field, yeah, they didn't split into four, they split only into two. Stark is one person, Zeeman is one person. Stark applied on electric field, Zeeman applied on magnetic field. What if we apply strong magnetic field after to the line split into four? I said no. Which year Bohr's model was discovered? 1908, 1910, around that time. 1906 to 1910. Yeah, Stark and Zeeman's effect is a single objection. Can you zoom your screen a little? Yeah, I will. Yeah, accurately two lines. Slide 5. Slide 6. Slide 7. Slide 8. Slide 9. Slide 10. Okay. So I'll explain one more objection which was raised to Bohr's model of an atom. Yeah. So there was a scientist by the name Heisenberg, Heisenberg, Heisenberg. He gave a principle which is called his uncertainty principle. So according to his uncertainty principle, it is impossible to simultaneously determine the location and momentum of an electron and other such subatomic particles. Okay. Heisenberg gave a principle. This is again a Nobel Prize winning principle, which he says it is impossible to simultaneously determine the location, that is the position, and the momentum. Momentum is mass into velocity. This is the position. Okay, so he said it is impossible for you to determine the position and momentum of an electron and other subatomic particles. So what did Bohr say? Bohr said that if there is a nucleus here, he said that there is a electron which is at a distance r from it. He was able to give the value for the radius. Then he was also able to give the energy, so that if you apply half mv square, you can find the velocity. Once you get velocity, mass into velocity is the momentum. So Bohr was giving us the radius and the momentum of a particle. Now Heisenberg had just proved that it is impossible to simultaneously determine the location and momentum of an electron. Not just an electron, of other such subatomic particles. The logic for that is very simple, that if you have to detect the presence of an electron, then some radiation must strike it. Now, if some radiation strikes it, the electron has so little mass that the electron will now get influenced by that radiation. So whatever you are measuring will not be its actual momentum. So any one of it you could measure properly, but Bohr was able to give both of them properly. So they said this is not possible. Okay, so this is yet another objection to Bohr's model of an atom. Yeah, so both are the same, which is electric field and magnetic field splitting is the same. Okay, so after this was in the year 2007-8. So after this, formulas that you have learned before are correct and they are applicable to Bohr's theory. So if in a question I should tell you apply Bohr's theory and then give an answer, then you have to apply those theories and give. But today in the real world, those formulas are proved to be wrong. So we don't work with those formulas anymore. But they are good enough for us to understand. Bohr's model was important because till Bohr said this, nobody knew about it. Okay, he still explained a lot that you and me can understand and work with. So we don't need more than that. So Bohr was able to explain why chemical compounds react. So Bohr was able to say that every species which has 8 electrons in its outermost shell is stable. So Bohr was able to explain that helium is not reactive. He was able to tell noble gases are not reactive. He was able to tell why sodium is reactive and it gives away 1 electron. So Bohr was able to explain a lot of things that are of importance to you and me as of now. Still, he was not able to explain everything. And for somebody in 1900, when there is no Google, when there is no labs, when there is nothing, and to devise experiments and prove this. Now, Heisenberg said this, we are learning this as a law. Now, suppose I give you the job, kindly prove this. We might take a generation to prove, right? So the ability of somebody to have said this when there was nothing in this world deserves some appreciation. Not some appreciation, deserves a lot of appreciation. Okay, it's very easy to say all these things, but it is difficult to prove. So the fact that they are appreciated is because they have proved these to the world. Okay, so if you understand this, we are done with this. Next, we go to the modern atomic structure, which we will call it the quantum theory. Okay, so we will call the quantum theory. We have gone even beyond this, but even this is able to explain everything that we need in our entire syllabus. So there are still a few things that we need which board did not explain. So those are explained better by the quantum theory or the quantum model of an atom. Okay, so if you understand, we will move on. So let's write down the quantum model of an atom. So we will write down, according to the quantum theory, according to the quantum theory, according to the quantum theory, an electron in any element is identified by 4 quantum numbers, is identified by 4 quantum numbers. Okay, according to the quantum theory, an electron in any element is identified by 4 quantum numbers. Yeah, the first of these is the principal quantum number. The first of these is the principal quantum number. Principal quantum number refers to the shell in which an electron is rotating around the nucleus. Yeah, the principal quantum number refers to the shell in which the electron is rotating around the nucleus. So this is n is equal to 1. Principal quantum number is represented as n. This refers to the K shell. N is equal to 2, L shell. N is equal to 3, KLM. This already Bohr had said. KLM, then again it goes on. So the principal quantum number represented by n, small n, refers to the shell in which an electron is rotating around the nucleus. Okay, so if you understood this, then the second one is called the azimuthal quantum number, represented by L. Azimuthal quantum number represented by L. This indicates the number of suborbitals present in each orbital. Suborbitals present in each orbit. Okay, it is represented by L and takes values from 0 to n minus 1. It takes values from 0 to n minus 1. So if n is equal to 1, L is equal to 0. If n is equal to 2, L is equal to 0 and 1. If n is equal to 3, L is equal to 0, 1, 2. If n is equal to 4, L is equal to 0, 1, 2, 3. If n is equal to 5, L is equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Azimuthal quantum number, AZIMUTAL, azimuthal quantum number. It is represented by L. This indicates the number of suborbitals present in each orbit. Okay, or you can say better than suborbitals, you say subshells. The number of subshells present in each orbit. Okay, and it takes a value from 0 to n minus 1. So if n is equal to 1, it will take only one value, 0. If n is equal to 2, it takes 0 and 1. If n is equal to 3, it takes 0, 1 and 2. If n is equal to 4, it takes value 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on. Okay, now, so that subshell which is represented by 0 is referred to as the S subshell. Okay, and it is circular. And it is circular in shape. S. That one subshell which is represented by L is equal to 0 is called the S subshell. And that S subshell is basically circular, spherical in shape. So you have the S subshell for which L is equal to 0, it is spherical in shape. Then you have the P subshell for which L is equal to 1. So the P subshell is dumbbell shaped. Like this. So that is the P subshell. P subshell is dumbbell shaped. D, for D, L is equal to 2. It is double dumbbell shaped. Double dumbbell shaped. Then F, L is equal to 3. It is a complex structure. Okay, so these are the different subshells within a shell. These are the different subshells within a shell. In the first orbit, you will have only S. In the second orbit, you will have S and P. In the third orbit, you will have SPD. In the fourth orbit, you will have SPDF, and so on. Sub means smaller shell. Within a shell, what is there? That is called a subshell. Orbit is biggest. Within an orbit is an orbital. No. In the past, no. It is not a failure. Basically, people learned from each other. So you learn from the mistakes that other people make. So if the other people don't make the mistakes, then there is no way we will learn. Both are strong. You can't say which is strongest. Stark effect is also there. Zeeman effect is also there. Okay, so both are strong. You can't say which is stronger. So subshells within shell. So you have a town. A town has locality. Within a locality, there are streets. Within a street, there are houses. So we are talking about the same thing. So there is a shell. Within that shell, there are subshells. So these are the subshells. S is spherical, P is dumbbell, D is double dumbbell, F is a complex structure. So this is the azimuthal quantum number. Azimuthal quantum number indicates the subshells which are present within a shell. Duck kutti ducklet. அதே மாதிரி ஷெல்லுக்கு குட்டி subshell. No, Stark is different. Many people contributed to the quantum theory. No single person contributed to the quantum theory. Many people contributed to the quantum theory. So this is what is finally agreed upon. So each one of us said one thing, and then they all put them together. And then, do we have S block element? Yes, you have S block element, P block elements based on these suborbitals only. Yeah. So I hope I've been answering all your queries. Okay. So yeah, many contributed. Now the biggest contribution was made by another scientist by the name Schrödinger, who said that an electron is not just a particle, so it is not a small ball. So this is not an electron. So an electron is a wave. So electron is nothing but energy, and that energy can be anywhere. So that wherever that energy is, we will say that is where the electron is. Okay. So the contributions that have been coming up, we don't need all those things. That now, though we are saying that it looks like this, it doesn't mean it is like this. It just means that the probability of finding the energy is high here. And this is, suppose this is the nucleus, probability of finding it here is 0. Then this is the second orbit. So now we are saying this is 2s, I mean 2p. Okay, so it is now they are saying that electrons are not particles. Electrons are not particles, but an electron represents a wave. It's like an energy, and that energy can be anywhere. So if that energy is present in a sphere like this, we call it the S. Then if it is present in a region like this, we call it the P. If it is in a region like this, we call it the D. Now you can imagine, suppose there are 3 dumbbells, then you can imagine. Go log into internet. You will, next class I will show you what complex structure is. So we will continue from here in the next class. I will, yeah. My dear friends, last time I am telling, please come to the class on time. I am not going to allow people to come beyond 9:45 from the next class. Yeah, okay. So we will discuss 2P and all, we'll discuss in the next class. Bye and all the best.